team at Co-Movement is super passionate about quality food, like I said, exercise, primal living, the whole deal. There's something that we talk about a lot, and there's a topic like with herbicide, glyphosate. It's something that I have read extensively about and listened to, and I'm surrounded by farm fields here in upstate New York, and I see those sprayers 1, 2, 3 times a year. And now seeing the research coming out with this chemical, I want to start here. I want to dive into what is glyphosate and why is it so bad for our health, and go from there.
Sure. Yeah. Glyphosate is one of the active ingredients in Roundup. There's other formulations that contain glyphosate as well, but that is the most known formulation to the American population. Roundup is the most widely used herbicide. It's sprayed on the majority of genetically modified crops. We even have so much sprayed that it now has contaminated some organic crops, and it could be found in the rains, just the rain that comes down on organic crops as well. So we see it in water samples. So it can also be found then in your own water supply. So it's very important to have a filtration system in your home that can filter that out, and some of them can. It is one of the most deadly substances that we know of, the man-made substances that we know of for our health. So for instance, it can by itself lead to leaky gut, which I'm sure you've probably talked about that before on your podcast. So that can lead to any inflammatory or chronic disease, the leaky gut by itself. It also, though, can lead to leaky brain. So most people are familiar with the leaky gut, and that the tight junctions aren't regulated properly. And so particulates that aren't supposed to be in the bloodstream can actually pass from the gastrointestinal tract through the interstitium into the bloodstream. And then that mounts an immune response. So a similar mechanism can happen in the brain. Glyphosate can actually, for lack of a better word, can break open the blood-brain barrier and cross into the brain. And even worse than that is we know that glyphosate is a chelator, so it grabs onto metals. So when that happens in the brain, it can actually transport metals, like heavy metals, for instance, into the brain.
Is joint pain or stiffness affecting your quality of life? I personally suffered from knee and lower back pain from my training and hobbies. Since I started taking a scoop of Native Path's collagen every day, I noticed a significant improvement in my joint health. I am able to do more things I enjoy with those I love and care about. I personally recommend everyone try Native Path's collagen for joint recovery and for a variety of other health benefits. Native Path has generously offered all of our listeners 15% off by simply entering the code AISA15 at checkout. That's code AISA15 for 15% off your entire purchase. All of Native Path's products are high purity, organic, grass-fed, and clean. So check out all of the great products they have available at their website, nativepath.com.
For sure. I know you mentioned it's water soluble, and for the listeners, like the Mississippi Delta, I've read where there's a dead zone, right, in the Gulf of Mexico, the size of, is it Rhode Island, right? Or something similar to that in terms of size, that the amount of glyphosate that's run down the Mississippi into the Gulf has killed life, all life in that section. And imagine like our local waterways. I know in this area in upstate New York, even we're in a rural, nice, quiet area, but we can't eat more than 3 ounces of fish from our local streams per month. That's the regulation with the Department of Environmental Conservation here, 3 ounces a month because of the chemicals in these fish.
Wow.
And that's, I know, I'm sure glyphosate isn't the only one that's contributing to that. We have atrazine and so many other things, but that just blows my mind that I can't go fishing in a beautiful rural stream take my daily catch for the day and then go home and cook that for my family without feeling horrible,
Yeah,
That's just so sad.
that is. And 3 ounces is nothing.
Oh,
For each dog.
no,
Like,
no.
wow, that's very sad. That's very sad. Another problem is the amount of fertilizers that are dumped on these industrial, industrial grown foods. When I used to live in Southwest Florida, and we had to move from that state. We're now in Virginia, but the main reason we had to move was because of the red tide. Right. And part of the reason why the red tide is so bad is from all of the chemicals that are dumped in, right? That get the rain rains down on these agricultural plots, these industrial ones, and it goes into these big rivers like you're talking about, and it gets dumped there in the Gulf. And so it's not just the glyphosate, it's what's also in the fertilizers, and it's causing massive fish kills. Like when we were there in Southwest Florida, they would have warnings. Like they'd say, if you have a small dog, don't come to the beach today, because thousands of fish would wash up dead and birds would have neurological issues. And it was from the red tide. It's like, it's a naturally occurring algae there in the water. But when you put an environmental pressure on it, like dumping all these chemicals into the ocean, it sees it as a threat. And so it's releasing these toxins into the air as a defense mechanism. And unfortunately, those toxins make us sick. So I had severe neurological issues when I was there. Chronic headaches. I lived 20 minutes from the beach, but because of the way the winds blew from the ocean onto the land, I would instantly know when the red tide was high. It was instant headaches, congestion. The most painful headaches I'd ever imagined. And it contributed to several miscarriages that I had, which is, they're seeing that now in the different mammals that are in that area, the reproductive issues. So it's not just like, oh yeah, fertilizer's great. There's a consequence to all of these actions, that we take. And this is one reason why I partnered with Joel Salatin, because he understands these unintended consequences and he knows how to correct them with things like regenerative agriculture.
Yeah, for sure. And, we're highly passionate on the regenerative agriculture side. Also, I'm a mini homesteader, not full-time by any means, but I enjoy it. But, one of the things, because we are surrounded by farmers up here, and half my family are full-time dairy farmers. And, the old tradition and the old ways, so many of them are not up for changing anything.
Yeah.
And so like every season before they spray this 35-acre field in front of me with glyphosate, I go out, speak to the farmer, same guy, different year, and say, would you mind not spraying it or going to hay, or just, asking. And, it's not harmful. We don't spray a lot, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, oh my gosh, but so I don't know what that's going to take. I know that I don't think we're going to change their minds, but I'm hoping like the younger generation of the new culture is just going to slowly overtake that mindset with time. I want to dive in, Sina, to GMOs. When I learned about the background of why GMOs were created, I was very intrigued and sort of distraught at how that came about. So can you tell our listeners like how that whole industry even came to fruition?
So which piece are you speaking about in particular?
Genetically modified organisms, yeah. GMOs.
But yep. You mean you were distraught to learn how they came about?
Yeah, so with the chemical industry patenting the seeds to be like weed resistant and only grow with certain chemicals applied to them. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, so really what you have here is, in my opinion, are a handful of companies trying to create a monopoly of the food supply, right? And this is a control issue. If you control the food, you control the people, right? This has been done in other countries by dictators, think of the Ukraine. So what they do, or one of the ways in which this started, was Monsanto said, okay, so we're going to create these genetically modified seeds. So for instance, corn. And we're going to modify it so that you can spray a chemical like glyphosate all over it, and it will kill all the weeds around it, but the corn itself won't be affected. It will stay alive. Well, so what that meant was if a farmer buys the genetically modified seed, they have to buy also the glyphosate, the Roundup, to go with it, right? Because they go together like peanut butter and jelly. So they had to buy that with it. And those are both products that Monsanto has sold. So there's the monopoly right there on those that they're trying to create on those two markets. And one of the agreements was that you couldn't save the seeds, for instance. So, and this is a key for farmers to be able to save their seeds, right? And so they effectively took that ability away from them. Like it was illegal for them to keep those seeds. All right. So, so that happened. And then they started creating more modified crops. And they sold it as, you're going to have higher yields and healthier crops and whatnot. Well, that wasn't always the case, and a lot of farmers had difficulties with it. And some of them started to get sick. But, there's an issue with coming off of Monsanto's products, and, it gets tied into the whole, like, who owns what. And they started to sue some farmers. Say like one farmer was planting Monsanto seeds and spraying glyphosate. Then there was an organic farmer located next to him. Well, there would be drift sometimes onto the organic farm, and with the glyphosate, but also with the GMOs. And there were some cases where Monsanto sued that organic farmer, saying that like they stole the seeds, right? Like, Monsanto owns these seeds and they stole it, when it happened because of drift, So they've been very ruthless, and it's been very demoralizing for a lot of farmers.
I wanted to interrupt this amazing podcast with a brief message about one of our sponsors, Lombardi Chiropractic in Oneida, New York. Nearly 65 million Americans report suffering from back pain, and I used to be one of them. I found Dr. Pete 8 years ago due to my continual back discomfort and pain. As an active athlete and someone who likes to play hard, I was frustrated when my sessions in the gym started to regress, my sleep went downhill, and I had no idea why. After a comprehensive evaluation by Dr. Pete's team, I was given a detailed treatment plan that I followed to the T. After 3 months of care, my body felt amazing. As a coach, I understand that if you don't maintain your abilities, you will lose it. And the last thing I wanted to do was lose the great progress I had made. I have used Dr. Pete as my personal chiropractor for the last 8 years and attribute much of my physical abilities and overall health to his approach with chiropractic care. The good news is, Lombardi Chiropractic is offering a 50% discount on the initial exam and x-rays to all new members that mention the A is A Health podcast. So stop trying to self-diagnose and save yourself time and money by visiting lombardichiropractic.com and schedule your initial consultation today.
I want to get into microRNA. You mentioned earlier about like you are what you eat, essentially. And so I heard in one of Zach Bush's podcasts, I'll just read this quick. He said in one of his chats that a chicken that lives in a tiny steel cage surrounded with fecal particulate its entire life, never sees green grass, never intermingles with fellow chicken friends, can hardly stand up and never sees sunshine, is then slaughtered and packaged for us to eat. We inherit a portion of that bird's emotional makeup. And then he gave the example of why so many people have anxiety around 2:00 p.m. after eating lunch. And that's because of their lunch is filled with meat that inherited this microRNA. And so I know that it may seem sort of far out there to maybe some of the listeners, but can you talk a little bit about like the accuracy with this statement, if any? Are we onto something with like happy animals, happy people? Because I'm fascinated by that.
Yes. And actually, I'm so thrilled that you brought up microRNA because I love this topic and nobody ever asked me about this. Like, I don't think it's well known yet, you know? So yes, microRNAs are a fascinating field. And I'm also going to bring in the biofield on this. So Dr. Bush is absolutely correct that we all produce microRNAs. And we know this too. We also know this that from scientific literature, there's microRNAs in the foods that we eat. Okay, so whether it's meat or it's produce or eggs or poultry, they all contain microRNAs. And so what exactly they do, we're trying to figure that out, right? This is a newer discovery in the field of health and nutrition. So we do know that there's been microRNAs in like rice, for instance, and they can go in, you can ingest it and it can turn on and off genes. Mm-hmm. So this is a way that the genetic material of that food actually interacts with our genetic material, which I think is fascinating, right?
So do I.
It lets you know that we are not these separate entities like we tend to think we are. We are all interconnected, all right? We also know that this is true with the people who you're hanging around with, for instance. So you are, again, if I'm talking to somebody here in this room with me, we are exchanging microRNA. All right. And this is one reason why we think the longer you live with somebody, you know, you've heard that, like, oh, you kind of tend to look like each other. Yep. Well, we don't think that's a coincidence. We're thinking this might in part be through exchanging this genetic material, you know, back and forth. So this is a very fascinating field because the question is, okay, well, what is packaged in that microRNA, right? We know that they're in these lipid vesicles, right? Otherwise, the microRNA would just break down very quickly, you know? So they're packaged in these vesicles, and that's how when, like, say you'd ingest it or you'd breathe it in, it's able to, in large part, sustain digestion, right? And get integrated into your body. So what we think is happening is that we are working, and I tend to think of nature and the body as working together. All right. I don't have this view that when you eat food, you're at war with the food. Like, you know, there's a lot of people in my field that actually think that. I don't actually think that. I think there's a synergy there. Like, we're here to help each other. And so the question is, why would we be exchanging these microRNAs with our food? And one reason that has been theorized that I subscribe to, and this is just one, is that these microRNAs are a communication system. So between the food and us, and between the food and the food, and between one human to the next human. So if you think about it, we know that, for instance, trees do this already, right? When one tree is being attacked, you know, by like a pest or something, then the tree will actually release chemicals into the air, and it also works through the fungi under the ground to transmit signals in some way to the neighboring trees to warn them that, you know, this is here, rev up this machinery so that you can be defended against this pest that's come along. So the theory is that we do that as well. So if you just think of human to human, if one human, for instance, gets exposed to a cold and you start having the symptoms of a cold, which are actually detoxification symptoms of having a cold, then your body is turning on different genes that it normally would, right? Because it is trying to detoxify. And so when it does that, it's going to produce a different type of microRNA. So if I had that cold and I was around, for instance, my husband, the theory is I would be exchanging a different type of microRNA with him now, right? He would be ingesting from me in some way, maybe the nasal passages, breathing it in, maybe through the mouth, because as you talk, you actually do kind of spit some. Somehow it gets ingested, and that microRNA signals to his body that there's some pathogen here or some kind of disruption that's caused my body to be out of balance. And that may actually be why he develops symptoms a few days after I get the symptoms, is his body's trying to detoxify. So we don't know for sure, but that is one theory.